Alex, you mentioned the Trump administration. I I don't know how to express it, but I feel if Marco Rubio was the vice president, they could have assassinated Donald Trump. You know,
I think you're right, Nima, but I suspect this. I don't necessarily know it. Marco Rubio is there thanks to Trump's donors. And I don't know what the relationships are, but I do remember one meeting at the White House. Maybe it was with Zelensky, maybe it was with Keir Starmer or something. And Rubio was, Trump gave word to Rubio or something like that. And he said, we're going to be very careful about you. We're watching you carefully. To Rubio. Trump was saying to Rubio, we're watching you very carefully. So, maybe Rubio has some leeway there. Maybe he's on a leash. Maybe he serves a purpose. And maybe if he was vice president, if he was the vice president, then maybe you're right. Maybe somebody would make the effort to assassinate Donald Trump. But right now, with J.D. Vance as vice president, you'd have to assassinate them both. I don't know, but yeah, for sure, there's some creeping civil war going on in the United States and inside of the administration, and I think that's normal because the people who benefited the most through the post-World War II global order are today some of the most powerful people in the world. And for sure, they have very considerable political influence still. They're going to be everywhere. They're going to be in the Treasury Department, in the Justice Department, in the FBI, in the Pentagon, on Wall Street, and so forth, in the military-industrial complex. So this is not a simple enemy to take on. And for sure, they're close in the White House. And Marco Rubio is probably one of them. It's possible that Marco Rubio is not one of them, that he's pretending to be one of them, that he's like an undercover cop. But I doubt that. Marco Rubio has been on the wrong side of the equation, apparently, for a very, very long time. So I expect that he's still on the wrong side of the equation.
I see Marco Rubio nobody without the support that he's getting from the lobby. Who's Marco Rubio, Alex? Because they tried so hard to put Marco Rubio as the vice president of the United States. And you know who was against that? Tucker Carlson. And the people like Tucker Carlson. They said, no, Marco Rubio cannot be the vice president of the United States. That would hugely put Donald Trump in a dangerous position.
Yes.
Look at the X. What's going on X? Look at the way that the Zionists are behaving. They're connecting J.D. Vance to Tucker Carlson. They're talking about that Tucker Carlson's son is working with J.D. Vance. These people are so much connected. When we talk about that J.D. Vance is getting, AIPAC, sort of help and aid, Charlie Kirk was doing the same. These people are helping. But after all, these people, in my opinion, after all, they're independent. They have their own mindset. And when it comes to the moment that they have to decide about it, they're fearing that moment, by the way.
Yes. Yeah. And it seems to me that they are on the back foot. It seems to me that the walls are kind of closing in around them. I don't know what the role of Epstein files is in this whole thing, but I always suspected that Epstein files are probably being leveraged against the administration's political enemies. They have been of late, since Trump declined to make them public, they've been kind of used against him, in a sense that the insinuations that he was involved with Jeffrey Epstein have been all over the social media. It's almost been a cottage industry of pushing out pictures of Trump with Jeffrey Epstein, or of Trump with some young woman, girl. But I don't think that's true. I mean, the DNC tried to destroy Trump for 8 years, and they've tried absolutely everything. And they had Epstein files in their custody. Had they found something they could use against him, I don't see why they wouldn't use it to destroy him. I mean, being accused of working with a known child trafficker and being compromised in that way, it would have been so easy to destroy Donald Trump. And then there's also Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, who said there's nothing that incriminates Trump in the WikiLeaks, in the Epstein files. And Julian Assange is very credible. I don't know that he made a wrong statement based on what he has. So I very much doubt that there's something there. But, something's obviously happening under the surface, behind the scenes, that is, I think, tectonic. And I think that all the globalists inside of the administration are on the defensive, and that the sovereigntists, Trump, Vance, I don't know who else, Witkoff, they're on the offensive. The thing that was confusing me quite a lot over the last few weeks is the question of Venezuela and the question of Bagram Air Base, because that was the first time I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe Trump is control opposition, but we haven't heard anything about Bagram Air Base anymore. He just made a few statements after his meeting with King Charles and in England when he was in London, and then nothing. And then with Venezuela, I still don't know what's going to happen there. But I remember the hostilities with Iran, when they were for weeks they were bringing these B-2 bombers and troops to Diego Garcia and all these assets, making it look like they're completely preparing for a major regime change war against Iran. And then nothing. We had a fake war. Some people say oh, no, it was not fake war. He went to war against Iran. No, he didn't. A war is Libya. A war is Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq. Those are real wars. Remember Fallujah, how it was in Syria, how it was in Libya. It was like weeks upon weeks of hundreds of sorties, thousands of tons of bombs dropped. This was just one day, couple of things. This was a fake war. So I still hope that the Venezuelan situation will work itself out in a similar way, because we've now just found out a few days ago that as all this escalation and rhetoric was going on, they opened negotiations with the Maduro regime. And then I haven't heard from Machado in a few days. I don't know what happened to her, but she's kind of gone off the media radars. So we'll see. But in general, particularly judging by the statements coming out of Russia, it seems to me that something is happening for real, that the system in the world is being changed, and that it's going from permanent forever wars into something different, in a new security architecture, which is hopefully one that will give us a permanent peace.
Alex, in this structure that you mentioned, is the SCO far ahead of BRICS?
How do you mean far ahead of BRICS?
In terms of the security, it seems to me that they have a better understanding of a multipolar world in terms of coming together, security, and what's important. Because in BRICS, you have a lot of discussions that is much, the concept is wider than what's going on SCO. SCO is so much focused.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, but I think that's understandable because, SCO is at its core a security organization, and it's it's the axis is Russia and China, basically. Authoritarian regimes, let's call it that way. Like regimes that are less subject to regime changes. You couldn't come in and start funding some opposition and pushing them forward, and then they take over, and then they renege on SCO obligations and agreements. Whereas when it comes to BRICS, there's a lot of countries that still have these very flawed, very hollow democracies, where one day you might have Jair Bolsonaro in power, then you have like a total turnaround. It's antithesis, Lula da Silva. Then a lot of them have, been part of this dollar-centric world trade system. So a lot of these countries have large trade balances on the Federal Reserve Bank ledgers in US dollars. So if they turn away from the rules-based global order too abruptly, they could be sanctioned. They could have their assets frozen, which you could risk bringing yourself into a situation like Venezuela or Cuba, where you're sanctioned and blockaded and embargoed, and your economy starts falling apart, and then you become vulnerable to a regime change, to a coup. And then for some reason, all these countries are deathly afraid of the IMF. I can't say that I quite understand this, but every time the IMF comes to some country, basically the political top soil themselves, and they do whatever they have to do not to upset the IMF. And I think that all these things will take time to change. To disenfranchise the IMF, to overcome the fear of economic sanctions and trade embargoes and losing access to their assets in Western banking systems. That'll take time, and this, I think, is why BRICS is so much easier to disunite. It's so much easier to pull countries away from BRICS, like Argentina, like we just saw with when Milei came to power. Whereas SCO is it's the axis is Moscow, Beijing. It's a security organization, and it's completely on the Eurasian continent. It's not all across the world. And then it doesn't have any vulnerabilities to the IMF. They don't care about Federal Reserve funds, US dollars. They don't care about trade sanctions. It's purely a security organization, and in that it's certainly stronger and more robust.